History books only tell part of the story. Beneath the official record lies a hidden world of secrets and whispers. Stories so compelling, they have outlasted the empires that spawned them. Today we venture into the shadows of time to uncover 25 secret myths of forgotten empires. By the end, you will possess a collection of the world's most captivating historical mysteries. Stories that challenge everything we assume about the past. We will question who really built the pyramids and ask if a Roman legion vanished into China. What forgotten truth do you hope is waiting to be found? The first myth on our list begins with a question that has haunted historians for generations. How did a civilization, seemingly overnight, master the art of moving and placing 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons, with a precision that rivals modern machinery? The official timeline shows a steady progression of tomb building in ancient Egypt, from simple mud brick mastabas to the step pyramid of Djoser. Yet the Great Pyramid of Giza appears almost as a sudden, inexplicable anomaly. Its sides are aligned to the cardinal points with an error of less than 1/15 of a degree. The stones are fitted together so perfectly that a credit card cannot be slipped between them. This breathtaking leap in engineering, occurring without any clear evolutionary prototypes, is the fertile ground where our first secret myth took root. For centuries, storytellers and theorists have whispered of outside help. They point to the legend of Atlantis, described by the philosopher Plato as a powerful island empire that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night. The myth suggests that survivors of this cataclysm, possessors of lost knowledge and advanced technology, traveled to Egypt. There, they guided or directly oversaw the construction of the pyramids, embedding celestial mathematics and earth energies into the monuments. This idea of Atlantean architects solves the puzzle of the missing link, offering a dramatic explanation for a technological jump that otherwise seems to defy logic. It transforms the pyramids from mere tombs into potential beacons or libraries, built by a forgotten civilization to preserve its wisdom, while mainstream archaeology points to ingenious ramps, water channels, and the incredible organizational power of the pharaohs. The allure of the Atlantean myth persists. It speaks to a deep human desire for a grander, more interconnected past, where the seeds of knowledge were planted by masters from a world we can no longer see. That idea of lost knowledge traveling across the world leads us directly to our next mystery, a tale of soldiers who vanished into the east and became legend. The Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC was a catastrophe for Rome. A proud army led by the general Crassus was annihilated by Parthian horse archers. Ancient historians recorded that tens of thousands of Romans were killed or captured, but whispers persisted that a sizable group of legionaries, perhaps 10,000 men, escaped the slaughter. According to the myth, this band of survivors did not try to trek back to Roman territory. Instead, they turned east, becoming mercenaries and wanderers, selling their martial skills as they journeyed further and further into unknown lands. Centuries later, a fascinating clue surfaced in Chinese historical records from the Han Dynasty. They mention the capture of a strange fighting formation in a battle around 36 BC. Soldiers who used a fish scale formation, a shield wall tactic that sounded remarkably like the Roman testudo. These captives were reportedly settled in a frontier region in a place named Lycian. For a long time, Lycian was just a name on an old map, until scholars began to look at a small village in modern-day China called Zhelezhai. The villagers there have long told stories of foreign ancestry, with some even having distinctive features like lighter hair or green eyes. In the early 2000s, DNA sampling was conducted, and the results sent a ripple of excitement through the historical community. Some tests showed a significant portion of the male population carried genetic markers common in Western Eurasia. Could these be the descendants of those lost legionaries? The academic debate is fierce and ongoing. Skeptics argue the genetic evidence is not unique to Romans and could have come from later Silk Road traders, perhaps from Central Asia. They point out that Lycian was a common name for frontier settlements, and the fish scale formation description, while intriguing, is not definitive proof. Yet the myth persists because it captures something profound about the ancient world. It was far more connected than we often assume. a Roman coin found in a Japanese tomb, Chinese silk in a London grave. These are real artifacts that prove people and ideas traveled astonishing distances. The story of the Lost Legion transforms that dry fact into a human epic, a narrative of resilience and accidental colonization. It asks us to consider how history is written by the victors, and how the stories of the defeated, the displaced, and the disappeared often survive only as ghostly echoes in the DNA and folklore of distant lands. The story of wandering Romans hints at how easily fact can blur into folklore, a theme that becomes even more pronounced with the next artifact of mystery. Deep within the humid jungles once ruled by the Maya, a different kind of legend took shape, one carved not from stone, but from crystal. The myth tells of perfectly formed human skulls, sculpted from a single block of clear or milky quartz, with a craftsmanship that defies the tools of the ancient world. These were not mere ornaments, they were said to be vessels of profound power. Some stories claimed the skulls could reveal the future, heal the sick, or even store the knowledge of lost civilizations like Atlantis. Others whispered they were gifts from the stars, created by alien visitors as data storage devices or communication tools. The allure was intoxicating, painting a picture of the Maya not just as astronomers and pyramid builders, but as keepers of esoteric, interdimensional secrets. This modern myth found its spark in the late 19th century, a time when explorers and adventurers were bringing spectacular treasures out of the jungles of Central America. Several of these dazzling crystal skulls began to appear in private collections and museums, most famously the so-called Mitchell Hedges skull, reportedly found by the explorer's daughter during an expedition in Belize in the 1920s. Its jaw was detachable, and its surfaces were so flawlessly polished that it seemed to glow from within. For decades, these artifacts were presented as genuine pre-Columbian masterpieces, physical proof of impossible ancient technology. They inspired countless books, films, and theories, becoming central icons in New Age beliefs. The turning point came when science finally asked for a closer look. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, researchers subjected the most famous crystal skulls to rigorous analysis. Using powerful microscopes, they looked for the telltale marks left behind by the tools used to carve them. What they found was definitive, and it shattered the ancient myth. The microscopic grooves and patterns on the skulls showed the unmistakable signature of rotary wheels and lapidary tools, instruments made of industrial-grade abrasives that simply did not exist in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. The skulls were modern creations, likely carved in Germany or elsewhere in Europe in the 1800s, during a booming market for exotic antiquities. This debunking is about far more than exposing a clever forgery. The myth of the crystal skulls represents a profound and often problematic romanticization of indigenous cultures. It projected Western fantasies onto the Maya, imagining them as mystical conduits to other worlds instead of understanding them on their own complex terms. It replaced the true, rich history of Maya innovation in mathematics, writing, and astronomy with a more sensational, outsider-driven narrative. The real mystery is not how the skulls were made, but why we so desperately wanted them to be ancient. They fulfilled a longing for a magical past, a tangible connection to a wisdom we felt we had lost. In doing so, they inadvertently obscured the authentic, and equally fascinating, genius of the civilization we sought to admire. That same longing for a tangible link to a rewritten past fueled one of history's most audacious and convincing forgeries. In 1965, a quiet announcement sent shockwaves through the academic world. Yale University revealed it possessed a medieval map unlike any other. Dated to around 1440, it showed a remarkably accurate Europe, a detailed Greenland, and most astonishingly, a large island to the west labeled Vinland. According to accompanying text, this land had been discovered by Norse explorers. Here, it seemed, was the smoking gun, a pre-Columbian document proving Vikings had not only reached North America, as the sagas suggested, but had mapped it for the world to see. The implications were monumental. It would shatter the traditional Columbus-centric narrative of discovery, recasting the story of the New World's encounter with the Old. The map's supporters pointed to its style, which appeared consistent with other 15th century works, and early scientific tests seem to back them up. In the 1970s, a team analyzed the ink using a new technique and declared it contained anatase, a form of titanium dioxide, which they believed could only have come from medieval sources. For a time, the Vinland Map was hailed as genuine, a priceless relic that validated the Viking sagas and reshaped history textbooks. The desire for it to be real was overwhelming, a chance to correct what many saw as a Eurocentric oversight. But a good myth, especially a forged one, often contains a fatal flaw hidden in its own creation. Decades later, with far more advanced technology, researchers took another look. This time, they weren't just identifying the presence of anatase, they were analyzing its precise crystalline structure. The anatase in the map's ink was not the crude, naturally occurring kind a medieval scribe might have used by accident. It was a pure, synthetic form, a specific type of titanium white pigment that was not commercially produced until the 1920s. The ink itself was a modern chemical cocktail laid carefully over genuinely old parchment, likely taken from a blank page of a medieval book. The map was a brilliant, patient fraud, crafted to exploit both our scientific limitations and our deepest historical wishes. So why does this exposed forgery still captivate us? The truth is, the Vikings did reach North America, at a settlement called Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, confirmed by archaeology decades ago. The myth of the map wasn't about proving that fact. It was about proving their knowledge was recognized and recorded by the wider medieval world. It offered a neater, more documented alternative to the messy, often violent history of Columbus's arrival. We wanted a cleaner origin story, one where European discovery was earlier, quieter, and somehow less consequential for the peoples already living there. The Vinland Map forgery succeeded because it gave us not what was true, but what we felt should have been true. A parchment pardon for the complexities that were to come. The desire to recover a lost library leads us from forged maps to a very real, and very painful, historical wound. We all know the story of the Library of Alexandria burning. It is a shorthand for the destruction of knowledge, a single night where the wisdom of the ancient world supposedly went up in smoke. But what if the greatest minds of antiquity had a backup plan? This is the secret myth of Alexandria's hidden archive, the tantalizing belief that the librarians, seeing the political storms gathering, secretly moved the most precious scrolls to safety. They could be in a forgotten cellar beneath the modern city, or shipped up the Nile to a remote monastery, or even sealed within the foundations of a temple. This isn't just a fantasy about finding old books. It is a hope of recovering voices that have been silent for 2 millennia. We are talking about the complete plays of Sophocles and Aeschylus, the lost histories that told the story of Carthage from its own perspective, the scientific works of Aristotle that might reshape our understanding of ancient thought, and the passionate, personal poetry of Sappho. Their absence leaves gaps in our collective memory we can never fill, or so we thought. The myth finds a foothold in the complex reality of the library's destruction, which was not one fire but a series of disasters over centuries. The main library, part of the royal palace, was likely damaged during Julius Caesar's civil war in 48 BC, but Alexandria had a backup, a daughter library housed in the magnificent temple known as the Serapeum. This temple complex stood as a fortress of knowledge for centuries more, a center of learning and pagan worship. Its final destruction in the late 4th century AD, ordered by a Christian bishop, is often seen as the true death knell for the ancient library's legacy. Yet, the physical structure was so vast, with underground chambers and labyrinthine passages, that the idea of a hidden cache within its ruins has never seemed entirely far-fetched. Modern archaeology has not found a secret room bursting with papyrus, but it has revealed clues that keep the dream alive. Excavations around the suspected site of the Serapeum and the ancient palace district have uncovered networks of subterranean tunnels and storage rooms. In 2004, Polish archaeologists working in the city did make a stunning discovery, not of scrolls, but of 13 lecture halls from the later Roman period, proving that Alexandria remained a university city long after the library's fame had faded. Each find like this whispers a possibility. Could the custodians of knowledge, in those final desperate days, have chosen to bury their treasure rather than see it burn. The myth endures because it speaks to our deepest intellectual regret. We are haunted by the loss of the Library of Alexandria because it represents a road not taken in human history. What breakthroughs in philosophy, medicine, or astronomy were delayed by 1,000 years because those texts were lost? The hidden archive myth is a promise that the conversation with the past is not over, that one day, a worker's shovel might clink against a sealed clay jar, and the ancient world will speak to us again in a complete sentence, not a fragment. It is the ultimate historical second chance. The hope of a hidden archive is a dream of preservation, but our next secret myth is born from a ruler's desperate fear of the opposite. He did not want his legacy stored, he wanted to carry it with him forever. The first emperor of a unified China, Qin Shi Huang, conquered death itself in legend. The story says his apparent passing in 210 BC was a magnificent ruse. Having finally discovered the elixir of immortality, he simply entered a deep, prolonged slumber within his monumental tomb complex. There he rests, surrounded by rivers of shimmering mercury, simulating the great waterways of his empire, protected by his silent terracotta legion, waiting for the day he will awaken and rule again. This is not just a ghost story. It is a narrative woven directly from the emperor's own documented obsessions. Historical accounts, primarily the great historian Sima Qian writing a century later, paint a vivid picture of a man terrified of mortality. He dispatched massive expeditions across the seas, sending out ships filled with young men and women in search of the mythical Pinglai Mountain, home of the immortals. His court alchemists worked furiously, concocting potions that often contained dangerous substances like mercury, believing it could grant eternal life. Ironically, many historians now suspect these very elixirs may have contributed to his relatively early death. But it is Sima Qian's description of the emperor's tomb that truly fuels the myth. He writes of a subterranean palace with ceilings inlaid with pearls to mimic the stars, and vast relief maps of the empire on the floor, with flowing mercury representing its rivers and seas. He mentions ingenious mechanical crossbows rigged to fire at any intruder, and warns that the tomb workers were sealed inside to protect its secrets. For over 2,000 years, this description was all we had, a terrifying and fantastical account that seemed too elaborate to be entirely real. Then, in 1974, farmers digging a well-struck pottery. They uncovered the edge of the now famous terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots standing in battle formation. This was the emperor's outer guard, and its discovery proved that the ancient records were not mere fantasy. It made the even more incredible descriptions of the inner tomb suddenly, chillingly plausible. Modern science has added compelling evidence. Remote sensing surveys of the enormous burial mound have detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil, patterns that match the layout of China's major rivers during the Qin dynasty. This scientific data aligns almost perfectly with Sima Qian's 2,000-year-old story. So why does the myth of the sleeping emperor persist, even as we slowly uncover his tomb? Because the central chamber remains unopened. Chinese archaeologists, citing both immense technical challenges and deep cultural respect, have chosen not to excavate the heart of the mound. That sealed door is a blank space onto which we can project the ultimate mystery. Is he truly in there, preserved in a mercury-laced slumber? The myth endures because it represents the ultimate paradox of power. The first emperor unified a fractured land, standardized writing and measurement, and began the Great Wall. Yet all his earthly might could not conquer a simple biological fact. His entire tomb complex, a city-sized monument to eternity, is a screaming denial of that fact. The terracotta army is not just a guard, it is a promise. A promise that the emperor's authority, his very self, would transcend time. As long as that central chamber stays closed, the promise remains technically unbroken. He is not dead in the public imagination, he is waiting. And in that waiting, Qin Shi Huang has achieved a form of the immortality he sought, forever alive in the stories we tell about him. A ruler's obsession with immortality often begins with the fear of his own army's mortality. For the kings of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, whose domain stretched from India to Egypt, that fear was answered by a legend made flesh. They created a unit so formidable that their very name became a weapon of psychological terror, the Immortals. Greek historians, who faced them on the battlefield, described a force of exactly 10,000 elite soldiers. They were the Empire's personal guard, its shock troops, and its most potent symbol of endless power. The myth was simple and devastating. No matter how fierce the combat, their ranks never appeared to thin. If one man fell, another instantly took his place, as if the unit itself could not die. To the hoplites of Sparta and Athens, staring across the plains of Marathon or Thermopylae, this must have been a soul-crushing sight. They were not just fighting men, they were battling an apparition, an endless tide of polished spears and intricate wicker shields that regenerated before their eyes. The supernatural explanation felt real because the effect was flawless. How does an empire craft such an illusion of invincibility? The secret was not magic, but a masterpiece of bureaucracy and logistics that was, in its own way, just as impressive. The Achaemenid state was a marvel of administration, connected by the famous royal road and a swift courier system. The Immortals were not a single, static group of 10,000 superheroes. They were a permanent institution, a standing core with vast support structures. Behind the front line of the 10,000, historical evidence suggests there was a second, identical force of 10,000, equally trained and equipped, held in immediate reserve. When a soldier from the first rank was killed or gravely wounded, a man from this second tier would seamlessly step forward to fill the exact gap, maintaining the perfect, intimidating number. Furthermore, the Empire maintained detailed rosters and supply depots across its territories, capable of drafting and training new recruits from the warrior noble class to constantly replenish those secondary ranks. The system was a brutal, efficient conveyor belt of manpower, hidden behind the glittering facade of the elite front unit. The terrifying myth of the Immortals was a direct result of this flawless logistics. The Greeks, whose city-state armies were mustered for specific campaigns, had never encountered a military machine of this scale and permanence. They saw the effect, the undying ranks, and ascribed it to the supernatural because the mundane truth was almost beyond their comprehension. This reveals a profound truth about how empires project power. True strength lies not just in the warrior on the front line, but in the scribe keeping the roster, the engineer maintaining the road, and the quartermaster moving the grain. The Persians understood that perception is a battlefield. By cultivating the legend of the Immortals, they won conflicts before the first spear was thrown, seeding doubt and dread in the hearts of their enemies. The unit's real immortality was not in the bodies of its soldiers, but in the enduring idea it represented, the terrifying spectacle of an empire so vast and so well organized that its resources and its will appeared truly infinite. The spectacle of imperial power often finds its purest expression in a garden, a living monument to a king's ability to defy nature itself. For centuries, we have placed one such marvel firmly in Babylon, a gift from King Nebuchadnezzar II to his homesick Median wife. The hanging gardens, with their terraced greenery rising like a mountain in the Mesopotamian plain, have long been a fixed star in the constellation of the Seven Wonders. But a compelling secret myth suggests we have been looking in the wrong empire entirely. What if this legendary garden was never Babylonian, but Assyrian, built not for love, but for the sheer, breathtaking assertion of dominance? The challenger to this ancient truth is Sennacherib, the fierce Assyrian king who ruled from Nineveh a century before Nebuchadnezzar. His own historical inscriptions boast not of war, but of a magnificent garden. He describes creating a wonder for all his people, a park mimicking the Amanus Mountains, stocked with every conceivable tree and fruit, a place where the scent of cedar filled the air. The key detail is how he watered it. Sennacherib's texts celebrate a staggering feat of engineering, a system of canals, dams, and most importantly, an enormous aqueduct at Jerwin that used true arches to bring water from mountain springs over 30 miles away. This was not irrigation, it was hydraulic artistry, precisely the kind of technology needed to lift water to the top of a towering, terraced garden. At his palace in Nineveh, modern archaeologists have found sculpted panels showing a lush, elevated garden, complete with an intricate water-raising device that looks like a giant screw, an Assyrian invention. The physical evidence on the ground in Assyria is concrete, while in Babylon, despite over a century of excavation, no trace of the gardens has ever been found. Not a foundation, not a water lift, nothing that matches the ancient descriptions. The case for Sennacherib is not just about shifting a location on a map. It strikes at the heart of how history is recorded and remembered. The classical Greek writers who compiled the list of wonders, like Herodotus, were writing centuries after Assyria had been crushed and its cities buried. Babylon, however, remained a famous and visited ruin. It is entirely plausible that over time, the story of a fantastic Mesopotamian garden became attached to the more famous, still visible city. If Sennacherib was the true architect, it rewrites a cornerstone of wonder lore not as a romantic gesture, but as a calculated display of absolute control. His garden was not a private refuge for a queen, but a public showcase of the empire's might, proving that the king could conquer geography itself, making the desert bloom through sheer will and engineering genius. This myth forces us to question the stability of our historical landmarks. It suggests that even the most iconic stories can drift from their origins, carried by time and reputation until the copy becomes more famous than the original. The Hanging Gardens may still be out there, not in the sands of Babylon, but waiting beneath the soil of Nineveh, a testament to an Assyrian king who wanted the world to remember not only his wrath, but his wonder. From a garden built for wonder, we descend into a story crafted for hatred. The Romans did not just defeat Carthage, they sought to erase it from history and memory. To justify that total annihilation, they created a myth of such profound evil that it has echoed for over 2,000 years. They claimed the Carthaginians, their greatest rivals, were not just enemies, but monsters who systematically sacrificed their own infants by burning them alive as offerings to the god Baal. This was not mere wartime slander, it was a calculated piece of propaganda so effective it shaped Carthage's legacy for millennia. The Romans, master storytellers, painted themselves as the civilized liberators, purging a barbaric cult from the earth. Their historians wrote graphic, horrifying accounts of bronze statues with outstretched arms, where living children were placed before rolling into a pit of flames, all to the sound of drums and flutes meant to drown out the mother's cries. It is an image of pure, unforgivable evil, and it served its purpose perfectly. For centuries, this Roman narrative was accepted as historical fact, the final proof of Carthaginian depravity. The truth, however, lies buried in the dust of a place called the Tophet. On the outskirts of ancient Carthage, archaeologists uncovered a sacred precinct unlike any other. It is not a typical cemetery, but a field of thousands of small burial urns, each containing the cremated remains of very young children and sometimes animals, placed beneath stone markers. The inscriptions are dedicatory, often to the deities Baal and Tanit. At first glance, this seems to confirm Rome's most damning accusation, but archaeology rarely offers simple answers. The discovery of the Tophet ignited a fierce and deeply emotional debate among scholars that continues to this day. One interpretation holds that the Roman accounts were essentially correct, that this was a site of ritual child sacrifice, a desperate practice perhaps performed in times of extreme crisis to secure divine favor. The sheer number of urns, some argue, suggests it was more than occasional. The other, increasingly supported interpretation paints a profoundly different picture. Proponents of this view see the Tophet not as a site of sacrifice, but as a sacred infant cemetery. In the ancient world, infant mortality was tragically high. These scholars point out that the remains are of children who died of natural causes, often prenatal or shortly after birth. In a culture with complex beliefs about the afterlife, these children who died before being named or integrated into the community might have required a special form of burial, a ritual offering to the gods to ensure their safe passage. The animal bones found alongside them could represent symbolic substitutes, not distractions from screams. The key is that both practices could produce nearly identical archaeological evidence, ashes in an urn. The myth of systematic infant sacrifice is a classic example of what historians call a black legend. a propaganda campaign that exaggerates or invents the atrocities of an enemy to justify one's own violence. Rome needed a reason for the Third Punic War to be not just a conquest, but a righteous extermination. By framing the Carthaginians as irredeemable child killers, they made the unthinkable thinkable. The subsequent total destruction of the city, the sowing of its fields with salt, and the selling of its survivors into slavery could be portrayed as a moral necessity, a cleansing of a spiritual plague. This myth succeeded so completely that it obscured Carthage's true nature as a sophisticated maritime power, a hub of commerce and learning. It reduced an entire civilization to a single, horrific ritual. The debate over the Tophet is about more than interpreting bones and urns. It is about untangling history from the stories told by the victors. It asks us to consider how easily the sacred grief of parents burying a newborn can be twisted, centuries later, into a legend of demonic cruelty. The real sacrifice may not have been of children, but of truth itself, offered on the altar of imperial justification. Fire has always been a weapon, but in the hands of the Byzantine Empire, it became something closer to sorcery. For over 7 centuries, one secret held the walls of Constantinople secure against fleets and armies, a liquid flame that burned on water and could not be extinguished. They called it Greek fire, and its formula was the most closely guarded state secret of the medieval world. The myth tells us this knowledge was so restricted, known only to the emperor and a single family of chemists, that it vanished forever when Constantinople finally fell. But what was this terrifying substance, and could its secret truly have died with the last Byzantine engineer? Contemporary accounts from both Byzantine and Arab sources describe its use in stark, awe-struck terms. It was not simply thrown, it was projected. Byzantine drahman warships were equipped with bronze tubes, like the necks of metal beasts, mounted on their prows. With a roar and a hiss, a stream of liquid fire would arc across the waves, clinging to enemy ships and setting the sea itself ablaze. The most terrifying detail, repeated by besieged Arab sailors, was that water only made the flames rage hotter. Sand or vinegar might smother it, but in the chaos of a naval battle, such remedies were often impossible to find. This was psychological warfare made manifest, a weapon that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. The secret of its composition was protected with a paranoia that feels modern. According to legend, the knowledge was compartmentalized. One family prepared the crude petroleum base from secret springs in the Black Sea region. Another, possibly the same family that invented it, handled the precise mixing of the mysterious ingredients that created its unique properties. The final, volatile mixture was prepared only in the capital, under the direct supervision of the emperor. The penalty for divulging the secret to any foreign power was death, not just for the traitor, but for their entire lineage. This system of secrecy was so effective that despite the Byzantines using Greek fire in countless engagements over hundreds of years, not a single reliable recipe was ever captured or recorded by their enemies. Modern chemists and historians have spent decades trying to reverse engineer the formula, becoming detectives in a laboratory. The base is agreed to be crude petroleum, essentially medieval naphtha, which was abundant in the region. The mystery lies in the thickening agents and the chemical additives that gave it its signature water-resistant and incendiary properties. Proposed ingredients read like an alchemist's shopping list: quicklime, which ignites on contact with water, saltpeter for a more explosive reaction, pine resin or sulfur to help it adhere and burn hotter. Some theories even suggest the mixture contained pressurized air or a form of early chemical ignition, explaining the dramatic projection from the siphons. The most plausible recreations produce a nasty, sticky flame, but none perfectly match the historical descriptions of a roaring, water-defying jet. The enduring power of the lost formula myth is not about the chemistry alone, but about what it represented. Greek fire was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of divine favor for the Byzantines and a symbol of technological terror for their foes. It saved Constantinople during the great Arab sieges of the 7th and 8th centuries, its flames turning the Golden Horn into a defensive mote of fire. It was the ultimate equalizer, allowing a shrinking empire to hold off vastly larger forces for generations. The idea that this knowledge could simply disappear speaks to the fragility of civilization. It suggests that some arts are not just forgotten, but so intimately tied to a specific place, a specific people, and a specific moment of need, that they cannot be transplanted. When the last keeper of that secret died, perhaps in the final, chaotic sack of Constantinople in 1453, a piece of practical magic left the world. We are left with a haunting thought that one of history's most potent defenses was not conquered by force, but simply lost to time, a whispered recipe that fell silent. While Greek fire defended a real empire, another myth created an empire entirely from hope and parchment. Medieval Europe, fractured by crusades and surrounded by powerful Islamic states, clung to a desperate dream. Somewhere beyond the known world, in the mysterious lands of the Indies, there existed a kingdom of unimaginable splendor and piety, ruled by a direct descendant of the three Magi, a priest-king named Prester John. His legend was a shimmering mirage of salvation. Letters circulated, supposedly from the king himself, describing a realm where pepper grew like forests, where a magical mirror showed every province, and where unicorns and giants served a Christian monarch whose palace was built of gems. This was not just a fairy tale, it was a geopolitical fantasy with a precise purpose. Europe believed it was not alone, that a mighty Christian ally was waiting in the east, ready to crush Islam in a great pincer movement. The origins of this phantom king are as tangled as the trade routes of the Silk Road. The name likely first echoed from real events in Central Asia in the 12th century. A Nestorian Christian ruler, Yelu Dashi, won a stunning victory against a Muslim Seljuk army. News of this distant Christian triumph, filtered through language barriers and wishful thinking, probably crystallized into the figure of Prester John. The myth was so powerful it began to move, migrating across maps as explorers failed to find him in Asia. When the Mongol Empire opened the East in the 13th century, emissaries like Marco Polo searched diligently. They found many Christian communities, like the Nestorians, but no fabulously wealthy priest-king. So the legend simply packed its bags and sailed south. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Prester John's kingdom had been firmly relocated to the highlands of Ethiopia, a real Christian kingdom that had been isolated from Europe for centuries. Its very isolation made it the perfect blank canvas for the myth. This relocation had monumental consequences. It directly fueled the age of exploration. Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, was driven not just by trade, but by a sacred quest to find the kingdom of Prester John and forge an alliance. Portuguese caravels crept down the West African coast, each cape rounded with the prayer that the next river might lead to the legendary king's court. When Portuguese explorers finally did reach Ethiopia in the early 1500s, the reality was a brutal shock. They found a landlocked kingdom mired in its own struggles, a devout but poor and politically complex nation, not the glittering utopia of the letters. The myth dissolved on contact, but its energy had already changed the world. The desperate search for a mythical ally had helped map the African coastline, establish new sea routes, and accelerate the global connections that would define the modern era. Prester John's kingdom was a castle built entirely in the European mind, but the ships sent to find it were very real, and they sailed straight into the pages of history. The search for a phantom Christian king was fueled by words on a page, but for the Mongols, the greatest secret of all was deliberately hidden from the written record. Theirs was an empire built by the wind from the steppe, and its founder, Genghis Khan, commanded that his final resting place be erased from the earth. The myth is stark and absolute. After his death in 1227, his loyal guard carried his body back to the sacred homeland of the Kentai Mountains. To conceal the tomb's location, they diverted a river to flow over the burial site, trampled the ground with 10,000 horses to erase all traces, and then, according to the most chilling version, slaughtered every soldier and laborer who participated in the rites. Finally, they sent a cavalry troop to massacre the funeral procession itself, ensuring no living soul could ever reveal the secret. It is a story of absolute silence, a vacuum of information so complete it feels like a physical force. Yet against this void, a single, enigmatic text whispers. The secret history of the Mongols is not a typical history book. It is an epic poem, a foundation myth composed for the royal family decades after Genghis Khan's death. It chronicles his rise from hardship to world conqueror with a blend of factual events, spiritual visions, and poetic allegory. For centuries, it was transmitted orally, a hidden treasure of Mongol identity, its very existence a guarded knowledge. The text is cryptic by design, full of symbolic language and oblique references. Scholars have long pored over its verses, searching for clues the authors may have embedded for the initiated. Does it contain coded directions, a geographic puzzle pointing to the sacred mountain Birkin Kaldon, or a specific bend in the Annan River? The tantalizing possibility is that the secret history doesn't just tell a story. It holds a map meant only for the descendants of the Golden Family. This creates a profound tension between myth and modern science. For outsiders, the tomb is the ultimate archaeological prize, a potential treasure chamber holding not just artifacts, but the undisturbed story of the empire's birth. For many Mongolians, however, it is a sacred site, a place of spiritual power that must remain undisturbed out of deep cultural respect. This respect has transformed the search into a uniquely careful and collaborative quest. Modern expeditions, often involving Mongolian scholars and international scientists, use non-invasive technologies. They fly helicopters with ground-penetrating radar over vast stretches of wilderness, deploy drones with multispectral cameras, and analyze satellite imagery for subtle landscape anomalies. They are not digging, they are listening to the Earth with electrons and light, hoping to hear the echo of a diverted river or the geometric signature of a hidden structure beneath the permafrost. The search itself has become a kind of respectful ritual, a fusion of ancient secrecy and cutting-edge technology. Every potential clue is weighed with reverence. A simple stone wall discovered in a remote region, a sudden cluster of deer stones marking a ritual site, an unusual magnetic reading, each is investigated with the understanding that this is not just a historical puzzle, but a national soul. The enduring power of this myth lies in its perfect contradiction. Genghis Khan was a figure of colossal, world-altering visibility, yet he achieved a personal invisibility so total, it defies the modern age. In an era of satellites and radar, one man's command for obscurity still holds. The tomb is the silence at the center of the Mongol storm, a void that continues to shape a nation's identity and captivate the world's imagination. It reminds us that some secrets are not meant to be found, only honored, and that the greatest power sometimes lies not in what is built, but in what is forever hidden. Genghis Khan's hidden tomb is a secret of earth and stone, but another legend speaks of a treasure that moved, a fortune on the run from a king's betrayal. The Knights Templar began as humble warrior monks, sworn to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. Within 2 centuries, they transformed into the medieval world's most powerful international bank, a financial network spanning from London to the Holy Land. Their abrupt end was as shocking as their rise. On Friday, October 13, 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, launched a coordinated dawn raid. Templars across France were arrested on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rituals, accusations extracted through brutal torture. The order was dissolved, its Grand Master burned at the stake, and its vast assets were supposed to be transferred to their rivals, the Hospitallers. But when royal officials rushed to seize the Templar treasury in Paris, the main vaults were found nearly empty. Where did the wealth of an empire go? This single historical fact is the bedrock of 1,000 legends. The myth insists the Templars, warned of the coming purge, smuggled their fortune out of Europe in a fleet of ships that vanished from the port of La Rochelle. Their treasure was not just gold and silver, but something far more profound, the ultimate relics of Christendom discovered during their original excavation under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This is where history bleeds into sacred mystery. The Templars' headquarters sat upon the ruins of King Solomon's temple, and their early excavations there are a matter of record. What did they find in those ancient tunnels? Legends whisper they recovered the Holy Grail itself, the cup of the Last Supper, or perhaps the lost Ark of the Covenant, the chest containing the tablets of God's law. Other tales suggest they uncovered scrolls, heretical documents that challenged the very foundations of church doctrine, perhaps proof of a bloodline of Christ. This hidden knowledge, not mere gold, became their true treasure and the real reason for their suppression. The myth then fractures into countless trails, each leading to a new enigma. Some say the treasure was taken to Scotland, hidden beneath Rosslyn Chapel, its symbolism carved in stone for those with eyes to see. Others point to the tiny French village of Rennes-le-Château, where a poor priest in the late 19th century suddenly spent a fortune renovating his church with bizarre, coded imagery, sparking theories he had found Templar wealth. Across the Atlantic, the myth entwines with the Oak Island mystery in Nova Scotia, where a centuries-old hunt for a buried treasure pit, complete with booby traps and cryptic markers, is often linked to the fleeing Templars and their lost fleet. These modern treasure hunts are powered by the same compelling logic. If an organization that's sophisticated saw its end coming, would it not have a contingency plan? The treasure's allure is not about greed, but about completion. It represents a lost chapter, a sacred continuity violently severed. Finding it would mean restoring a link to a pure faith, or uncovering a truth powerful enough to shatter a kingdom. The Templars' real legacy may be this. They taught us that the most enduring treasures are not those we can count, but the stories we are left to chase. Gold alone could not satisfy every king's curiosity. While Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire is rightly famous for his staggering pilgrimage to Mecca in the 1320s, a journey that flooded the Mediterranean with so much gold it depressed the market for a decade, his story begins with a deeper mystery. The man who made Mali synonymous with wealth almost never became king at all. According to accounts preserved by Arab historians like al-Umari, Musa's predecessor was his own brother, a ruler named Mansa Abubakari II. And this king did something almost unthinkable in the annals of power. He willingly gave it all up. After sending a first expedition of 200 ships to explore the limits of the Atlantic Ocean, only one vessel returned. Its captain reported a terrifying tale of a violent current in the open sea, a river in the ocean that swallowed the fleet. For most rulers, this would have been the end of the matter, a lesson in the dangers of the unknown. But Abubakari was not most rulers. Intrigued rather than deterred, he decided to see this mystery for himself. He assembled a second, even larger fleet of 2,000 ships, stocked them with enough supplies for years, and then abdicated his throne. Placing Musa in charge, Mansa Abubakari II sailed west from the coast of West Africa with the clear command: "Do not return until you reach the other side." Neither he nor his vast armada was ever seen again in the historical record. This is not a vague folktale. It is a specific account from court historians recorded by scholars outside of Africa. It presents us with a breathtaking what if. What if a 14th century African emperor, commanding the resources of the wealthiest empire on earth at that time, successfully crossed the Atlantic? The timing alone is electrifying, nearly 200 years before Columbus. The logistics, while monumental, are not impossible. We know the Mali Empire had access to large, ocean-capable vessels through its trade networks on the Senegal and Gambia rivers. The Canary Current, a powerful oceanic highway, flows directly from the coast of West Africa toward the Caribbean and the coast of Brazil. A fleet caught in that current could indeed have been carried across, whether by accident or by design. The myth gains further texture from scattered, controversial clues on the other side of the ocean. When Portuguese explorers first reached the Caribbean, they reported encounters with dark-skinned people they called Guanches, though that name is more associated with the Canary Islands. In Brazil, early European accounts speak of unusual metal artifacts and linguistic traces that some researchers have tenuously linked to West African origins. The most compelling and most debated evidence comes from the Olmec civilization of ancient Mexico, which flourished centuries before Mali. The colossal stone heads of the Olmecs, with their distinctive broad features and full lips, have long sparked speculation about possible African contact, though mainstream archaeology attributes these features to deliberate stylistic choices within a native Mesoamerican context. The hard, definitive proof of a Malian landing in the Americas remains elusive. No sunken 14th century Malian dhow has been found in the Caribbean, No inscription in Manding script has been uncovered on a Brazilian shore. This absence allows skeptics to dismiss the story as a legend, a tale perhaps conflating a disastrous coastal expedition with the idea of ocean exploration. Yet the myth of Mansa Abubakari endures because it challenges a deeply ingrained narrative. It inserts a powerful, sophisticated African actor into the story of Atlantic exploration, not as a passive figure waiting for European contact, but as an active, curious pioneer. It reimagines the ocean not as a barrier, but as a potential highway for cultures we rarely connect. Whether his fleet foundered in a storm, reached the coast of the Americas and assimilated, or sailed into oblivion, the story itself is a monument. It commemorates a king who valued discovery over dominion, who looked at the endless horizon and chose the mystery of the waves over the certainty of his golden throne. In that choice, he achieved a different kind of immortality, not in a hidden tomb, but in the boundless realm of what might have been. Gold was the compass that guided European dreams across the Atlantic, but one legend in particular promised a prize beyond all reason. The true story of El Dorado begins not with a city, but with a man, a ritual of breathtaking symbolism performed high in the Andes. At Lake Guatavita, a sacred crater lake in modern Colombia, the Muisca people would crown a new leader. The ceremony was an act of profound connection to the gods. The chosen man, the Zipa, would be covered from head to toe in sticky resin and then blown with gold dust until he gleamed like the sun itself. He was El Dorado, the gilded man. He would then board a raft laden with gold and emeralds, and as he reached the center of the lake, he would dive into the waters, washing the gold from his body as an offering. His attendants would then throw the precious treasures into the lake after him, a sacrifice to ensure the prosperity of his reign. This was the original, powerful myth, a spiritual transaction between a king and the divine. When Spanish conquistadors first heard fragments of this story, their minds did not see ritual, they saw inventory. They fixated on a single literal detail, a man covered in gold, and from that seed grew a monstrous fantasy. El Dorado was no longer a person, but a place, a city whose streets were paved with gold, a kingdom of such wealth that it would dwarf the treasures of the Aztecs and Incas combined. This conflation was a perfect storm of greed and misunderstanding, and it set in motion a century of blood and futility. Expeditions led by men like Gonzalo Pizarro and Sir Walter Raleigh plunged into the continent's heart, driven by rumors that shifted with every tortured confession. The myth became a phantom, always retreating further into the unknown. When no city was found on the high plains, it moved to the Amazon basin. When the Amazon revealed only disease and hardship, it was said to lie beyond the next mountain range, or in a hidden valley accessible only by a secret waterfall. Each failed search required a scapegoat, and indigenous guides bore the brutal brunt of this frustration. Populations were enslaved, tortured, and decimated by European diseases, all to extract directions to a place that existed only in the invaders' imaginations. The environmental toll was equally catastrophic, as vast stretches of jungle were hacked apart in the search for a golden mirage. The tragic irony is that Lake Guatavita was real, and it did contain gold offerings. Spanish attempts to drain the lake in the 16th century recovered a few hundred pieces, but the bulk of the treasure remained sunk in deep mud. A more serious British drainage attempt in the early 1900s did recover more artifacts, beautiful works of Muisca artistry now in museums, but it was a fraction of the legendary hoard. This tangible, yet modest, recovery proved the ritual's reality while simultaneously shattering the fantasy of limitless wealth. So why does El Dorado still haunt us? Because it evolved from a specific location to a universal metaphor. It became the story of the unattainable prize, the goal that justifies any sacrifice yet forever recedes as you approach it. In the modern world, we have our own El Dorados, the perfect investment, the ultimate discovery, the secret that will solve everything. The myth endures because it is a cautionary tale about the human heart, a warning that the most dangerous treasure maps are the ones we draw from our own desperate desires. The real gold was never in a city, but in the lesson we failed to learn, that some truths are not meant to be looted, only understood. The search for El Dorado was a quest for a phantom city, but another vanished community left behind a single, chilling word as its only epitaph. In 1587, over 100 men, women, and children from England's first attempted settlement in the New World simply ceased to exist. Governor John White returned from a desperate supply run to England to find Roanoke Island eerily silent. The houses and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed, suggesting a planned departure. The only message was a single word carved into a fence post, Croatoan, and the letters CRO carved into a nearby tree. There was no cross, the prearranged distress signal. This was not a scene of panic, but of deliberate communication. Yet for over 4 centuries, those 7 letters have fueled America's oldest and most haunting cold case. The immediate assumption was logical. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now Hatteras Island, and also the name of the Native American tribe allied with the English who lived there. The colonists, facing starvation and fractured relations with other groups, may have simply moved in with their allies. But when storms prevented White from sailing to Croatoan to investigate, the mystery solidified into legend. Without a body, without a clear answer, the human imagination rushed to fill the void. Later settlers in the area reported hearing English spoken in the woods and seeing European-style structures in native villages. A persistent 17th century tale claimed that a native tribe farther inland, the Lumbee, possessed gray eyes and could recite Christian prayers, hinting at integration. Other, darker myths took root, whispering of a supernatural punishment. Some suggested the colony was wiped out by a vengeful spirit, or even abducted by otherworldly forces. A story that resonates with our fear of being utterly erased from a hostile, unfamiliar land. For generations, the lost colony remained just that, a foundational ghost story for a nation. Modern science, however, has begun to turn rumor into research. Archaeology on Hatteras Island has uncovered a fascinating mix of artifacts from the period, English copper rings and gun parts found alongside traditional Croatan tools and pottery in the same soil layers. This is not evidence of a battle, but of cohabitation and trade, suggesting a gradual blending of communities. Meanwhile, archival detective work has uncovered a later report from Jamestown, where Captain John Smith was told by a Powhatan chief that the Roanoke colonists had indeed lived with a friendly tribe, but were later attacked by a rival group, with only a few survivors spared and assimilated. The most compelling modern investigations look not to the ground, but to bloodlines. The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, who have long held an oral tradition of partial English descent, have become central to this search. Genetic studies have begun comparing DNA from Lumbee descendants with genealogical records from the families of the lost colonists. While no definitive, single link has been proven to widespread satisfaction, several intriguing familial connections and shared rare genetic markers have emerged, suggesting that at least some Roanoke survivors were absorbed into native populations. The truth of Roanoke likely lies not in a dramatic massacre or an alien abduction, but in a quieter, more human story of desperation and adaptation. The carving of Croatoan was probably exactly what it appeared to be, a destination marker left by people who had run out of time and options. They likely split into smaller groups, some joining the Croatan on Hatteras, others perhaps attempting to reach the Chesapeake Bay as originally planned, only to be dispersed or killed. The myth persists because the lack of a neat ending challenges us. We want a clear verdict, a sunken ship or a mass grave, but history is often messy and incomplete. Roanoke's legacy is that single word, a testament not to a disappearance, but to a transformation. The moment the first English seed planted in American soil was scattered by the wind and took root in ways no one could have written down. The mystery of a vanished colony is a story of silence, but our next secret myth is built upon a sound, the imagined chant of priests at a monument that has never truly given up its name. Stonehenge stands on the Salisbury Plain as a riddle of concentric circles, its purpose obscured by 5,000 years of weather and wonder. For many, the image is inseparable, robed druids conducting mystical rites beneath the massive lintels as the summer sun rises. This powerful association is a classic case of mistaken identity, a historical echo that arrived thousands of years too late. The Celtic druids, The learned priestly class, recorded by Roman historians like Julius Caesar, flourished from roughly the 3rd century BC onward. The great stone circles of Stonehenge, however, were already ancient history by then. The first earthworks and timber structures on the site date back to around 3000 BC, with the iconic giant sarsen stones being raised around 2500 BC, a full 2 millennia before the Druids entered the historical record. So how did these two powerful symbols become fused? The marriage was largely a product of the Romantic and Victorian eras. Antiquarians, searching for a grand origin story for the mysterious stones, latched onto the Druids as the only native British priesthood described by classical writers. Painters and poets of the 18th and 19th centuries, eager for a mystical, pre-Christian British identity, enthusiastically cemented this connection. It was a beautiful fiction, grafting a known spiritual tradition onto an unknown builder, creating an instantly recognizable, if historically impossible, icon. This misattribution, however, opened the door for deeper, more speculative myths about the site's true purpose, secrets the stones might have held long before any Druid walked the land. One enduring theory cast Stonehenge as a prehistoric observatory, a stone computer dedicated to the sky. The alignment of the central axis with the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset is precise and undeniable. Certain stones also align with key lunar standstills, the extreme points of the moon's cycle, which occur only every 18.6 years. To its builders, this would not have been mere astronomy. It was a sacred covenant with the cosmos, a way to predict seasons, plan harvests, and enact rituals that maintain the balance of the world. Another secret myth transforms the monument from a calendar into a hospital. In the early 2000s, archaeologists studying remains from around Stonehenge made a startling discovery. A significant number of skeletons buried in the area showed signs of serious illness or injury, and crucially, they were not all locals. Isotope analysis of their teeth revealed they had traveled from as far away as modern Wales, Scotland, and even the Alps. This gave rise to the theory that Stonehenge was a Neolithic center of healing, a Lourdes of its day, drawn to the perceived power of the bluestones, the smaller inner circle of rocks geologically traced to the Preseli Hills in Wales. These stones were believed to possess curative properties, and the journey to the site was part of the healing ritual itself. Then there are the myths that leap beyond the terrestrial entirely. In more recent folklore and New Age belief, Stonehenge is a portal, an energy node, or a landing site. The sheer effort of its construction, moving 80-ton stones over 150 miles, seems to demand an explanation beyond human capability for some. This has led to speculations about lost technologies, ley lines concentrating Earth energies, or even guidance from otherworldly visitors. These stories, while disconnected from archaeological evidence, speak to the monument's enduring power to ignite our imagination for the extraordinary. The persistence of the Druid myth in popular culture, from fantasy novels to modern pagan ceremonies held at the solstice, is ultimately about human need. We see a sacred space and instinctively want to populate it with sacred people. The Druids, as wise keepers of nature's secrets, provide a perfect, poetic priesthood for a monument that feels deeply spiritual. The real builders, the Neolithic farmers and engineers whose names and beliefs are lost to time, remain frustratingly anonymous, so we gift them successors, draping the silent stones with a tradition we can better understand. In doing so, we acknowledge the true power of Stonehenge. It is a blank slate upon which every generation inscribes its own questions about faith, the cosmos, and our place within the long, slow turn of the years. Silence is a language all its own, and for one sacred object, it has spoken volumes for millennia. The Ark of the Covenant, the gilded chest said to contain the tablets of God's law, vanished from the biblical record after the destruction of the First Temple in Jerusalem. For most of the world, its fate is one of history's great blanks, but in the highlands of Ethiopia, there is no mystery, only a sacred and absolute certainty. The foundational myth of the Ethiopian Empire declares the Ark never vanished at all. It was brought to safety. According to the national epic, the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, it was Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who orchestrated its journey. After being educated in Jerusalem, Menelik and a group of Israelite nobles are said to have taken the ark from the temple, replacing it with a perfect replica, and carried it south to the kingdom of Aksum. There, it became the spiritual cornerstone of a nation, the ultimate proof of a divine covenant transferred to a new chosen people. This is not a whispered legend. It is a living, breathing pillar of identity for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian state. The belief is so profound that it shapes reality itself. In the ancient city of Aksum, within the complex of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, stands a small, nondescript chapel, guarded 24 hours a day by soldiers. This is the chapel of the tablet, and within it, believers know with unshakable faith, rests the ark itself. Its sole guardian is a monk, appointed for life, who never leaves the chapel grounds. He is the only living person permitted to see the relic. When he dies, another is chosen to take his place, continuing an unbroken chain of guardianship said to stretch back to the time of Menelik. No emperor, no patriarch, no scholar or tourist is allowed to enter that chapel and view the ark. Its presence is affirmed not by evidence, but by devotion. This creates a fascinating paradox, a historical object that exists entirely in the realm of faith, shielded from the very scrutiny that could prove or disprove its existence. For the outside world, this is the ultimate secret, a claim that cannot be verified. For Ethiopians, verification is irrelevant. The ark's power is in its believed presence, not in its physical inspection. It is the divine seal on their sovereignty, the reason they see their empire as a second Zion. During festivals like Timkat, the Epiphany celebration, replicas of the ark called tabots are brought out in magnificent processions, swathed in rich cloth. These tabots channel the sanctity of the original, allowing the community to interact with its blessing without disturbing the sacred solitude of the one in Aksum. The myth of the Aksumite ark does more than explain a missing artifact. It forges a direct, unbroken lineage from the court of Solomon to the throne of Haile Selassie. It answers a deep human need for continuity and divine favor, placing a nation at the very center of sacred history. The guardian monk, in his silent vigil, protects more than a golden box. He guards the soul of a civilization, a secret kept not to be hoarded, but to be believed. And in that unwavering belief, the myth becomes its own profound truth, untouched by time or doubt. The silence of a guarded chapel speaks of sacred continuity, but a very different kind of quiet is found on the open steppe, beneath ancient mounds of earth. For the Greeks, the world's edge was populated by monsters and marvels, but one legend felt particularly personal and terrifying: the Amazons. These were not just warrior women, they were a society inverted, a tribe where females ruled, fought, and famously removed a breast to better draw a bow. They were the ultimate barbarian foil to the civilized, patriarchal Greek world, a fantastical enemy for heroes like Hercules and Achilles to defeat. For centuries, this was considered pure myth, a symbolic story with no basis in flesh and blood. Then archaeologists began opening the kurgans, the burial mounds that dot the vast Eurasian steppes from Ukraine to Mongolia, the domain of the nomadic Scythians. Inside, they found a reality far more compelling than fiction. There, buried with full honors, were women laid to rest not with spindles and mirrors, but with the tools of war. One famous grave in modern-day Ukraine held a woman with a bent iron dagger, a quiver of arrows, and a headdress of gold plaques. Another contained a skeleton with a battle axe at her side. But the most startling evidence was written on the bones themselves. Forensic analysis of these female remains revealed injuries consistent with combat, peri-fractures on the arms from deflecting blows, and arrowheads lodged in bone. These were not ceremonial sacrifices. They were warriors who had lived and died by the blade and the bow. The Scythians, and their eastern relatives, the Sarmatians, lived a life defined by the saddle and the herd. On the endless grasslands, survival demanded that every able-bodied person contribute to defense and the hunt. Rigid gender roles were a luxury of settled, agricultural societies. On the steppe, a woman who could ride and shoot was not an anomaly. She was an asset to her tribe. Greek traders and colonists, encountering these nomadic peoples along the Black Sea coast, would have seen these skilled horsewomen firsthand. They witnessed a culture where women wore trousers, handled weapons, and participated in raids. To the Greek mind, this was so profoundly alien that it could only be processed through the lens of myth. They took an observed reality, women fighting, and extrapolated it into a complete societal fantasy, creating the Amazon nation as a distorted mirror of their own world. The myth served a clear psychological purpose for Greek society. By imagining these warrior women as a separate, monstrous tribe that their heroes could conquer, they neutralized the threat of the idea. It allowed them to acknowledge the existence of powerful women elsewhere, while reinforcing the boundaries of their own domestic order. The Amazons were always defeated in the stories, their power contained and explained away. The archaeological truth, however, reveals a richer, more egalitarian picture. These steppe women were not man-haters living in isolation. They were integral members of a mobile, martial society. Their burial with men, with similar grave goods, suggests a shared status. The myth of the Amazons, then, is a perfect case study in how a kernel of truth can be wrapped in layers of cultural misunderstanding and narrative need. The Greeks saw the symptom, the female warrior, but invented a completely fictional disease, a society without men. The real story is one of adaptation, where the harsh demands of a nomadic life created a space for women to step into roles that would have been unthinkable in Athens or Sparta. Those silent skeletons, surrounded by their weapons, are the rebuttal to the myth. They tell us that the most fantastic legends often begin not with pure imagination, but with a traveler's tale, badly told and desperately reshaped to fit the world as the listener already believes it must be. The warrior's skeleton speaks of a practical truth, but another relic whispers of a mind-bending leap of intellect. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of a tiny Greek island called Antikythera stumbled upon a shipwreck from the 1st century BC. Amidst bronze statues and pottery, they recovered a corroded, lumpy bronze object about the size of a shoebox. For decades, it sat in a museum drawer, a curious but unremarkable piece of ancient junk. Then, in the 1950s, a scientist named Derek de Solla Price began to X-ray it. What he saw inside would rewrite our understanding of ancient genius. The scans revealed a complex clockwork of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely cut with triangular teeth, all housed within a wooden frame that bore inscriptions and scales. This was no simple ornament. It was a machine, a hand-cranked analog computer designed to model the cosmos. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, could predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets with astonishing accuracy. It tracked the cycles of the Olympic Games and even predicted lunar and solar eclipses. Its complexity was staggering, a level of mechanical sophistication not seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. This sudden appearance of such advanced technology, with no clear evolutionary precursors in the archaeological record, created a perfect vacuum. Into that vacuum rushed one of the most persistent modern myths, the idea that its design was simply too advanced for the ancient Greeks. Proponents of this view point to the device's precise differential gearing, a concept not formally described until the 16th century. They argue that such a leap implies knowledge from an outside source, perhaps even extraterrestrial visitors or a completely lost, high-tech civilization like Atlantis. The device, they claim, is an out-of-place artifact, a solitary beacon of impossible knowledge. But to label it impossible is to profoundly underestimate the vibrant, interconnected world of Hellenistic science. The mechanism did not appear in a vacuum. It was the pinnacle of a centuries-long tradition. We know from writings that figures like Archimedes in the 3rd century BC built planetariums, intricate models of the heavens. The Antikythera mechanism is the physical proof of that tradition, a culmination of Greek astronomy, which had meticulously charted celestial cycles for generations, and Greek engineering, which had produced everything from automated puppet theaters to sophisticated water clocks. The genius of its maker was not in inventing new physics, but in translating existing astronomical theories, particularly those of the Babylonian and Greek schools, into a breathtakingly elegant mechanical language. Each precisely calculated gear ratio represents a known celestial period, the 19-year Metonic cycle, the Saros eclipse cycle, the orbit of the moon. It is mathematics made into moving metal. Recent research using advanced imaging techniques has even decoded more of its faded instructions, revealing it served as a philosophical teaching tool, a demonstration of a cosmos ordered by predictable, mechanical laws. The real tragedy is not that we cannot explain the mechanism, but that its knowledge was nearly lost. The Roman ship carrying it likely sank while transporting loot from Greece to Rome. The intellectual culture that produced it, centered in places like Alexandria and Rhodes, was itself fragile. As wars disrupted trade and centers of learning declined, the specialized craft of building such devices may have died with a single generation of artisans. The written works that explained its principles probably crumbled to dust in some library we can no longer find. The Antikythera mechanism is not proof of aliens, it is proof of a peak, a demonstration of how high human ingenuity could climb when resources, curiosity, and cross-cultural knowledge aligned. Its silent gears ask us a humbling question. How many other peaks of understanding have we lost simply because the thread of transmission was broken, leaving only a corroded fragment in a shipwreck to hint at the brilliance that once was? A machine's lost genius speaks of fragile knowledge, but another myth places its faith in a single, slumbering man. Deep within the Kyffhäuser mountain in Germany, legend says an emperor sleeps. Frederick Barbarossa, the red-bearded Holy Roman Emperor who drowned on crusade in the 12th century, did not truly die. He was taken into the mountain, where he sits at a stone table, his fiery beard having grown so long it now coils twice around the table's circumference. He sleeps, waiting for the ravens to cease flying around the mountain, a sign that his empire's darkest hour has come. Only then will he awaken, rise, and restore Germany to its former glory and unity. This is the king in the mountain archetype in its most potent form, a sleeping hero preserved in stone and time, a national savior on standby. The fascinating twist is how this myth migrated and evolved. Originally, the Kyffhäuser legend was attached to Barbarossa's grandson, the even more formidable Frederick II, a ruler of such intellect and power he was called Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. His death in 1250 created a vacuum of authority, a profound longing for his strong, central rule. Over centuries, as Germany remained a fragmented patchwork of states, the two Fredericks merged in popular folklore. The older, more iconic Barbarossa, with his vivid beard and crusader's aura, ultimately claimed the myth as his own. But this story is not uniquely German. It is a ghost that haunts all of Europe. In England, King Arthur sleeps in Avalon, ready to return when Britain needs him most. In Portugal, King Sebastian, who vanished in battle in North Africa, is expected to return on a foggy morning to reclaim his throne. In Scandinavia, the hero Aegir the Dane sleeps in Kronborg Castle, his beard grown to the floor, awaiting Denmark's peril. These are all variations on the same profound human response to trauma, the refusal to accept an ending. When a great leader dies suddenly, or a kingdom falls into chaos, the finality is too painful to bear. The myth of the sleeping king softens that blow. It says the ruler is not gone, merely resting, preserving his power for a future reckoning. The beard growing around the table is a perfect symbol of this suspended time, a clock made of hair, measuring the centuries of waiting. In the 19th century, as Germany moved toward unification, the myth of Barbarossa was stripped of its magical elements and weaponized as nationalist propaganda. The Kyffhäuser Monument, a colossal tower built in the 1890s, physically stamped the legend onto the landscape. It presented Barbarossa not as a magical sleeper, but as a historical precursor to the new German Empire, his centuries of slumber representing the long night of division now ended by the Kaiser in Berlin. The ravens were forgotten, replaced by iron and blood. This transformation reveals the dark utility of such myths. They are reservoirs of hope that can be tapped for political power. A story that began as a folk consolation for loss was harnessed to fuel a modern, expansionist state. The emperor in the mountain became a symbol of destined rebirth, justifying present ambitions by linking them to an ancient, unfinished destiny. Yet, in the quiet of the cave, the older magic persists. The myth endures because it answers a deep, psychological need for a second chance, for a hero held in reserve against the chaos of history. It is a promise that our greatest leaders are not consumed by time, but are merely waiting, beards slowly lengthening, for the moment we need them to open their eyes and set the world right again. A sleeping king preserves hope, but a waking god can command a mountain to rise from the plain. For the Khmer Empire, its crowning achievement was so magnificent it transcended human effort in the local imagination. The story goes that the great temple of Angkor Wat was not built by mortal hands at all, but by the divine architect Vishvakarman, or in another version, commissioned overnight by the god King Indra for his human son. These are not just pretty stories, they are a profound cultural verdict on the scale of the work. To stand before its 5 towers, shaped like lotus buds and mirrored in a vast moat, is to feel dwarfed by a vision that seems to belong to another order of being. The sheer mass is incomprehensible, an estimated 5 to 10 million sandstone blocks, each weighing up to 1.5 tons, quarried from a mountain over 50 kilometers away and floated downriver on a network of canals. The logistics alone feel superhuman. How do you feed, house, and organize a workforce of tens of thousands for the decades such a project would demand? The divine builder myth provides a beautifully simple answer: you don't. The gods did it. This spiritual explanation elegantly sidesteps the immense, grinding reality of earthly power. The archaeological truth, however, reveals a mastery just as impressive as any divine intervention. The genius of the Khmer was not just in moving stone, but in moving water. Angkor Wat is the heart of a hydraulic city. The temple's perfect alignment with the sun and its elaborate bas-reliefs depicting celestial realms capture our attention, but its foundation is a miracle of engineering. The Khmer transformed a floodplain into a managed landscape of reservoirs, canals, and moats on a colossal scale. The temple's own moat, over 5 kilometers long, was not merely symbolic. It was a massive stabilizing reservoir, regulating the water table beneath the massive stone structures to prevent subsidence during the violent monsoon droughts and floods. This system allowed for multiple rice harvests a year, producing the surplus food needed to sustain a vast non-farming population of artisans, priests, and laborers. The social organization required was a kind of terrestrial magic. Inscriptions tell us the empire operated on a system of corvée labor, where subjects owed a period of service to the god king. This was not necessarily slavery, but a religious and civic duty, a way to earn merit by participating in the construction of an earthly model of the cosmic Mount Meru. The temple complex was a machine for generating both political power and spiritual grace, its construction binding the population to the state through shared sacred purpose. The local myths of Vishvakarman and Indra were not attempts to explain away ignorance, but a form of ultimate praise. By attributing the work to the gods, the people were saying that the achievement was so perfect, so harmonious with the cosmic order, that it could only have originated from a divine blueprint. The human king, Suryavarman II, who initiated Angkor Wat, was not erased by this story. He was elevated. He became the conduit through which divine will manifested on earth. The stones themselves seem to agree with the myth. The bas-reliefs are so finely carved they look like embroidery in stone, depicting not only grand battles and heavens, but also intimate scenes of daily life, suggesting an army of sculptors working with breathtaking skill and patience. The precision of the causeways, the mathematical elegance of the galleries, all speak of a planning so meticulous it feels inspired. So which is the truer story? The answer is both. The divine myth captures the emotional and spiritual impact of Angkor Wat, the awe that makes a visitor feel small. The archaeological reality reveals the human ingenuity, the collective will, and the administrative brilliance that turned that awe into solid sandstone. Together, they tell us that when a human endeavor reaches a certain scale of ambition and perfection, the line between the mortal and the mythical inevitably blurs. The temple is a dialogue between earth and heaven, written in water and stone. The seamless stone of Angkor Wat represents a pinnacle we can trace and understand, but another modern myth rejects such clear lineages entirely. It proposes that the grand, ornate buildings of the 19th century, from the opulent state capitals of America to the sweeping train stations of Europe, are not what they seem. According to a sprawling internet-born theory, They are the surviving remnants of a lost, global super-civilization called Tartaria, a technologically advanced empire that was wiped from the Earth in a cataclysmic mud flood sometime in the 1800s. In this alternative history, our own ancestors did not build these structures. They merely moved into the empty, mud-caked ruins and claimed them as their own, inventing false histories to cover up the Great Reset. This is the Tartarian Empire mud flood theory, a perfect case study in how pseudo-history works by repurposing real, beautiful things to construct an elaborate fantasy. The theory latches onto a specific architectural aesthetic, the grand neoclassical and Beaux Arts styles that flourished in the 18th and 19th centuries. These styles, with their columns, domes, and ornate facades, were deliberate revivals of Greek, Roman, and Renaissance ideals. They were chosen for banks, libraries, and government buildings precisely to communicate stability, democracy, and enlightened civilization. To the mud flood theorist, however, this explanation is a cover story. They point to old photographs showing these buildings sometimes with ground floors that appear partially buried, or they fixate on the sheer scale and ornate detail of the stonework, asking how people with primitive 19th century technology could achieve such feats. The answer, they conclude, is that they didn't. A single unified global culture must have built them all with lost technology, and then a worldwide disaster, perhaps a great flood of liquid mud or a resonant energy weapon, buried the lower levels and reset humanity. The theory then spirals, claiming everything from free energy to an atmospheric ether was common knowledge in Tartaria, all suppressed by the new powers that arose from the mud. What makes this modern myth so fascinating is not its historical plausibility, which is zero, but its psychological mechanics. It takes something genuinely impressive, the architectural achievements of the Industrial Revolution, and replaces a complex, documented history with a simpler, more dramatic narrative of loss and conspiracy. It solves the discomfort of historical complexity by inventing a single, elegant cause for 1,000 different effects. Why do so many cities have similar grand buildings from the same era? Instead of acknowledging the global spread of architectural ideas through pattern books, world's fairs, and colonial empires, the theory offers a single, thrilling answer: a unified world culture. Why do some old photos show uneven ground or construction sites around new buildings? Instead of seeing the messy reality of urban development, they see evidence of excavation, not construction. This is how pseudo-history functions. It seizes on genuine curiosities or aesthetic consistencies and isolates them from all context. It ignores the voluminous paper trail of architects' drawings, construction contracts, worker diaries, and newspaper accounts that document these buildings being planned, funded, and built over years. It dismisses the evolution of building technology, like the steam-powered crane and the mass production of steel and plate glass, which made these structures possible. The mud flood theory is ultimately a story about alienation from the past. In a world that feels chaotic and poorly documented, it can be strangely comforting to believe that history itself is a lie, that a more advanced, more unified world once existed. It turns the mundane history of urban planning and stylistic revival into a hidden epic of catastrophe and amnesia. But the real mystery is not how these buildings were built. We have the blueprints and the receipts. The real mystery is why we are so quick to disinherit our own recent ancestors, to look at their hard-won mastery of stone and steel, and decide it must have been a gift from a phantom civilization, rather than the testament to human ambition, competition, and aspiration that it truly is. The smooth, monumental faces seem to watch from a different world, carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, some weighing over 20 tons. The colossal heads of the Olmec civilization are among the most iconic and enigmatic artifacts of the ancient Americas. Their powerful, naturalistic features, broad noses, and full lips have, for nearly a century, sparked a theory that stands sharply at odds with mainstream archaeology. The secret myth suggests these faces are not native to Mesoamerica at all, but are portraits of African visitors, voyagers who crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus and influenced the birth of the first great civilization in the region. This idea transforms the heads from local monuments into potential evidence for a global, interconnected prehistory. a tantalizing narrative of forgotten journeys. The visual argument is its primary fuel. To a modern eye, the sculpture's physiognomy can appear strikingly similar to artistic representations from parts of Africa. When combined with other speculative evidence, like alleged African plants in the New World or vague similarities in pyramid construction, the myth builds a compelling, alternative story of cultural genesis. It proposes that the Olmecs, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica, were either inspired by or directly descended from these hypothetical transatlantic travelers. The psychological pull is powerful, offering a dramatic rewrite of a history that has often marginalized or ignored the achievements of African societies. If true, it would place African explorers at the very dawn of American civilization, a profound corrective to traditional narratives. Mainstream archaeology, however, hears a very different story told by the stone and the soil. The consensus view is one of brilliant, independent innovation. The Olmec civilization, which flourished in the humid lowlands of the Gulf Coast of Mexico from around 1500 to 400 BC, developed in complete isolation from the Old World. The colossal heads, 17 of which have been discovered, are now understood as portraits of powerful Olmec rulers. Each head is distinct, wearing a unique helmet or headdress, likely representing the protective gear worn during the ritual ball game, a central feature of Mesoamerican life. These were monuments to individual authority, carved from basalt sourced from the Tuxtla Mountains and transported dozens of miles without the wheel or draft animals, a testament to the Olmec's own staggering organizational skill. The stylistic features, which some interpret as African, are consistent with later Mesoamerican art. Similar broad, fleshy faces with wide noses appear in Maya and Aztec sculpture, representing an indigenous artistic tradition that valued specific ideals of beauty and power. The scientific evidence is decisive, genetic, linguistic, and archaeological date, all confirm that the peopling of the Americas occurred via the Bering Land Bridge tens of thousands of years ago, with no indication of significant Old World contact until the Norse voyages or Columbus. The heads are a homegrown masterpiece. Why, then, does the myth of African contact remain so persistent? The answer lies less in archaeology and more in the politics of history itself. Diffusionist theories, which propose that all major cultural advances must have come from a single, often Old World, source, have a long and problematic history. For centuries, Western scholars refused to believe that Native Americans could have built great civilizations on their own, attributing pyramids and complex calendars to lost tribes of Israel, Phoenicians, or other outsiders. The African Olmec theory, while often framed as a corrective to Eurocentrism, can inadvertently fall into the same intellectual trap. By suggesting the Olmecs needed an external catalyst, it risks denying them their own agency and genius. It can simplify the rich, complex process of cultural development into a story of mere transmission, overlooking the incredible indigenous creativity that produced not only the heads but also a written language, a sophisticated calendar, and monumental architecture. The myth, however well-intentioned, can become a new form of othering, where the native achievement is explained away by a foreign influence. The enduring mystery of the colossal heads is not about their origin, but about their purpose and the society that commanded such labor. Who were these rulers? What deeds warranted immortalization in 20 tons of stone? The heads were not buried as treasures, but were deliberately arranged in lines, perhaps in sacred precincts, where they could oversee the community. Their expressions range from serene to stern, from contemplative to formidable, each a silent sovereign guarding secrets we can only guess. Their very existence speaks of a society with a highly stratified social order, capable of mobilizing vast labor for symbolic, political ends. The true fascination lies in entering the Olmec world on its own terms, to understand why these people chose to represent power in this specific, awe-inspiring form. To label them as portraits of foreigners is to bypass these deeper, more challenging questions. The heads challenge us to expand our understanding of human diversity and artistic expression, to recognize that the features we see are a testament to the varied human forms that populated the ancient Americas, not a signpost from across the sea. They are a reminder that wonder does not require a transoceanic voyage. It can be found in the profound and mysterious capacity of a civilization to look into the mirror of its own identity and carve what it sees into eternity. The colossal heads of the Olmecs are a testament to a civilization looking inward, but our final secret myth gazes toward the highest peaks on Earth, searching for a paradise that exists just beyond the map. For centuries, Tibetan Buddhist texts have spoken of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom cradled by snow-capped mountains, a place of perfect peace and advanced spiritual knowledge. It is not a heaven for the dead, but a physical realm, accessible only to those whose karma is pure enough to find the path. This ancient concept was reborn for the Western world in 1933, when James Hilton published his novel Lost Horizon. He gave it a new, mellifluous name, Shangri-La, a secluded Himalayan valley where time slows, people live for centuries, and culture is preserved from the ravages of the outside world. In the shadow of global war and industrial anxiety, Hilton's vision struck a profound chord. It offered an escape, a sanctuary where all the beauty and wisdom of humanity could be kept safe, like a seed bank for civilization itself. This fusion of ancient scripture and modern fiction created the ultimate myth of a hidden refuge, and it sent real men with packs and compasses into the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. The spiritual blueprint for this paradise is intricate. In Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala is a Baal, a hidden land, one of many said to have been consecrated by the great guru Padmasambhava as sanctuaries for future times of strife. The Kalachakra Tantra, a profound cycle of teachings, describes it in almost geographical terms. It speaks of a land shaped like an 8-petaled lotus, surrounded by a ring of icy mountains, with a majestic capital at its center ruled by a line of righteous kings. The prophecy states that when the world is overrun by greed and hatred, the 25th king will emerge from Shambhala with a vast army to defeat the dark forces and inaugurate a global golden age. This is not a passive utopia. It is a fortress of righteousness, waiting for its moment to act. For devotees, Shambhala is as much a state of mind as a place, an inner kingdom achieved through intense meditation and moral discipline. The journey there is allegorical, a path through one's own illusions, yet the tantalizing possibility of a physical location has never faded. This possibility has fueled expeditions that blur the line between pilgrimage and exploration. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as the British and Russian empires vied for influence in Central Asia, the myth took on a geopolitical sheen. Explorers and spies, like the Russian mystic Nicholas Roerich, trekked through the passes of Tibet and Nepal, partly for art and archaeology, but also with a whispered hope of glimpsing the hidden valley. They returned with tales of strange lights in the mountains and encounters with sages who spoke of ancient knowledge, but no coordinates. Later, even figures like Heinrich Himmler, perverting the search for his own occult fantasies, dispatched Nazi expeditions to Tibet, seeking the origins of the Aryan race and the power they believed Shambhala held. These quests, whether spiritual or sinister, all shared a common thread: the conviction that a literal, secret world of power existed in the high Himalayas, waiting to be claimed. Modern seekers often point to remote valleys like the Hunza in Pakistan or the Tsangpo Gorge in Tibet, places of stunning beauty and unusual longevity among the inhabitants, as potential candidates for the real Shangri-La. The appeal is understandable. In isolated communities that have preserved traditional ways for centuries, outsiders see an echo of Hilton's timeless paradise. But this is where the myth confronts a poignant truth. The search for a literal Shangri-La often overlooks the very people living in those mountains. It projects a romantic, static ideal onto cultures that are dynamic, complex, and facing real-world challenges. The myth can become a form of cultural appropriation, where a living landscape is valued only for its ability to mirror a foreign fantasy of purity and escape. Ultimately, the enduring power of Shambhala and Shangri-La lies in their metaphorical truth. They are not addresses, but aspirations. They answer a deep, human yearning for a center that holds, a place untouched by decay, conflict, and the relentless rush of time. In a world that feels increasingly fragmented and transient, the idea of a hidden valley where wisdom is preserved and life has meaning is a powerful anchor for the soul. It is the dream of a second chance, not for an individual emperor like Qin Shi Huang, but for all of humanity. The myth tells us that paradise is not lost in the past, but hidden in the present, protected by mountains of our own making, waiting for the day we cultivate the inner clarity to find the path. The real expedition, then, is not across glaciers, but inward, a journey to build that kingdom of peace within ourselves, making the myth real not by discovery, but by creation. From the search for paradise in the clouds to the depths of a king's mercury-laced tomb, these 25 secret myths have taken us across continents and centuries. We have stood with lost legions in China, unraveled forgeries in university vaults, and questioned the silent faces of ancient rulers. Each story, whether anchored in a sliver of archaeological fact or born from pure human imagination, serves as a powerful reminder. Our history is not a single, settled narrative written in stone, but a living conversation between what we can prove and what we desperately wish were true. These myths are the echoes of that conversation. They reveal our timeless longing to recover lost glory, to possess hidden knowledge that could rewrite our origins, and to feel a connection to something grander and more mysterious than the everyday world allows. They are the shadows cast by forgotten empires, and in studying those shadows, we often learn more about ourselves than about the past. We see our fears of oblivion in the sleeping king, our hope for redemption in the hidden archive, and our awe of the unexplained in the silent, precise gears of a sunken computer. Now, the journey turns to you. Of all these secret myths, which one captured your imagination most completely? Was it the phantom Christian king who reshaped maps, or the emperor dreaming in a river of mercury? Do you have a theory about the lost colony's final message, or a thought on where the Templar treasure truly rests? Share your thoughts and your own favorite historical mysteries in the comments below. And if you want to join more expeditions into the forgotten corners of time, be sure to subscribe. Our next journey into the unknown is already waiting.